Hello and welcome back to the channel. This is an epic record-breaking day. It is the first interview that I will be having with another Enneagram 5 here on the channel. And I am super excited. It's a topic that I am super passionate about. It is an Enneagram 5 that is also here on YouTube. So in the description box below, I will be listing his channel. And it is such a privilege to be here today with Jason. Jason is with Soulfire 209. I'm going to bring Jason in to explain a little bit more about what his specialty is and what we are going to be discussing.
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. What a privilege to get the first interview slot on the Enneagram 5 channel. And as a fellow 5, it was good to stumble across your channel and learn more about myself, actually. But along with my wife, Christine, we work in campus ministry at Clemson University and a place called, or with a group called the Navigators. And so we've been working with college students for 17 years now. And part of that journey of helping college students, along with my own journey, got me into ministering to issues of sexual brokenness and primarily pornography addiction. And that's what I started my channel about, with the hope of bringing gospel hope to a porn-filled world to remind folks that sexual integrity is possible.
Beautiful. Our focus today is going to be on the pornography side of things, but I hope to have you back another time to talk more about sexual integrity as well. So thank you again for your time.
Yeah, definitely.
So I want to do a quick disclaimer. We are both of Christian religion beliefs, and not all of our viewers on this channel are. So can you speak to that a little bit? Is everything that you're going to be presenting today from a Christian point of view, secular? Where are you coming from?
So a lot of the statistics and resources I'll mention today do come from a secular viewpoint. I've kind of got a foot in both worlds. I think obviously from a religious standpoint, we have a reason of trying to honor God to live with sexual integrity, but a lot of the resources and statistics I'll mention today come from secular sources.
So applicable to everyone. And
Yep.
Just as a footnote, at the end or later today, I will be adding to this video down in the description below. And then not only Jason's channel, which I hope you check out, and lots of really, really high quality. Well, let's just pause. Of course it's high quality. Of course it's researched. Of course it's accurate and helpful. You know, you're awesome. You're awesome, and you're a 5. So high five to you.
Yeah, you can kind of guarantee if a 5 has stepped on a platform to proclaim some truth that he's researched it and got his mind full of all the data behind it.
Precisely, well said. About how common this is.
So one thing I notice doing this research is the statistics can tend to really be all over the place. And I think that's because, like a lot of things in our culture, it really can be sensationalized. And I do try to avoid that. I want to be accurate in my portrayal of the present reality of pornography in our culture. And so one of the things I'm going to quote for today is this book by Samuel Perry called Addicted to Lust. And he is not a Christian. He's a professor at the University of Oklahoma, but he studies Christians and he studies sexuality. And so here's what he says about current use of pornography in America. Quote, "Pornography has never been a more acceptable or visible part of the American cultural landscape. How frequently are Americans viewing porn these days? Data from a large probability sample of American adults surveyed in 2014 show that well over half of men and over a quarter of women under the age of 40 seek out pornographic material monthly. And over 45% of men and 16% of women under 40 intentionally view porn in a given week." And so that survey was specific to men and women under the age of 40. And in that range, you can say it's an issue that many have a monthly relationship with. Now, I think when you get to younger folks that are teenagers, maybe even middle school, they are seeing so much pornographic content with all the digital media that they consume. I don't know that they would necessarily report it as I viewed porn. They've essentially been pornified. It's just very culturally acceptable. It's something they see frequently.
You know, I like how you highlighted a little bit, or at least it jumped out to me, that this is not just a guy issue. Sometimes there's a misnomer about that, and that the statistics, and I'm sure actually your experience with the collegiate crowd has shown that this kind of knows no gender, knows no age limits. Would you be willing to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think part of what motivated me to address this issue is how many of my Christian college students were struggling with porn. I reached a point a number of years ago where I found that I was better off assuming the young men in our ministry were struggling with it, and many of our young women were as well. And so the internet is what really changed the game for the porn industry. They're able to prey upon children, put their toxic, addictive content in the minds of these kids at younger and younger ages. So speaking about the issue with women, again, I'll quote Samuel Perry in that book. He said in 2016, roughly half of young women whom we would consider fundamentalist Protestants, so these are Christians, reported viewing porn in the previous year. By comparison, about 56% of conservative Protestant men reported viewing porn that same year. Not even a statistically significant difference. So at least in the church, it's often been thought women don't struggle with porn, but that's certainly not true. And unfortunately, that stigma is what can make it even harder for women to bring their struggle into the light. So for our young girls, there can be a lot of social pressure, especially if they're in a public school, to be knowledgeable about sex. And kids today, they're going to go to Google with their question. So according to Boston University School of Medicine, young adults ages 18 to 24 in the U.S. said that porn is their most helpful source of information about how to have sex. So really, porn is the default sex education for American kids. So we shouldn't be surprised that it's not just affecting women or men, that women are also being exposed to this content.
You know, what strikes me about what you just said is not only the gender differences, but I guess out of those statistics, how would one even describe what, I guess it's in the description of what porn is.
Right. Yeah. Depends on how you define it. And there is a research by Barna, and that is a Christian research organization, and they actually asked people, how would you define porn before they did their survey? Because, you know, what maybe we would have considered porn 30 or 40 years ago, today is so mainstream. It's on cable television. It's going to be slattered all over social media that they wouldn't necessarily define that as pornographic content.
Yeah, agreed. You know, I was watching some, you know, after 8 p.m. This wasn't even, you know, after like midnight. Yeah, I was just on regular TV after 8 p.m. the other night, and I was like, whoa! Yep. Like, what channel are we on? And he's like, this is like, I think it was TBS or something. I mean, I'm not going to throw any channel under the bus, but I was like, this is regular TV. What do you think about certain personality? Have you seen personality traits, or whether it's Enneagram or anything like that, that tends to be struggle more with this issue, or is it? What is your take on that as far as personality?
Yeah, so I'm not like an Enneagram expert by any means, but I think the correlation I notice for young people who are those that are more introverted, they like to stay in their rooms all alone, it's going to be a lot more difficult to recover from pornography addiction, and they're a lot more likely to struggle with it. The phrase I often quote is, if you sit in a barber chair long enough, you get a haircut. And so if you're all alone in your room, surrounded by digital technology, that's going to be a place you may fall into, and it's going to be hard to stop. So community is going to be critical. So for our personality types that they're more outgoing, they're hanging out with other folks, you know, this is going to be something that they're not as likely to fall into. Well, I would like to ask you about that, though. You're more the Enneagram expert. So do you think certain Enneagram numbers are more prone to addictive tendencies?
Well, you know, full disclosure, my master's degree, I have a master's degree, but it is not in, you know, psychology or things like that. But I've done the deep dive, and I'm learning. I'm a student. I think you really nailed it more with the introvert-extrovert conversation.
Yeah.
You know, I think 4s and 5, the 4s, the 5s, the 9s, you know, probably have, like you said, more tendencies just because they're alone more. Yeah. And I do think, and I don't know, someone way smarter than me can probably let me know in the comments or shoot me an email if they have, you know, an insight into this more than I do. But yeah, I think the 4s and the 5s, we're definitely, yeah, we definitely can get in our heads a lot and not always socialize like we, you know, like we could.
Yeah, community is critical.
Yeah.
Yep.
2 decades ago, a friend of mine who was a recovering alcoholic, and he was probably 20 years my elder, and I said, you know, what can you share with me about your experience? And he said exactly what you just said.
Sit in the barber chair long enough, you eventually get a haircut. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. You know, if you're somewhere you shouldn't be, or you're with friends that are doing things long enough, that's definitely, I like that. So some might ask, well, and I actually saw this I'm also an INTJ, and I'm in a great INTJ female forum, and this actually came up in between when we originally started talking and today about what's the harm?
Right.
Like, why do we even care? You know, I'm in a healthy relationship with my husband, or it helps me in certain ways, or blah, 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 or I do it and it's just fine. And what would be your response to someone that says that? Like, well, what's the big deal anyway?
I think, you know, that's something I could probably talk about for quite a while. A few thoughts, especially if we start with a non-religious angle. You know, pornography really reduces people to products. So it's exploiting someone for someone else's pleasure. And for some people, they have chosen this lifestyle. It's consensual, they're being paid, they're willing to allow others to exploit them in that way. But for many, pornography is nothing more than sex trafficking. So here's one statistic: 49% of all trafficking victims and 70% of underage trafficking victims reported that pornography was made of them while they were held in bondage. So there's no way to know if the porn you're consuming is consensual, or it could actually be a trafficking situation. And recently, how this has come to light is in 2020, a New York Times article was titled "The Children of Pornhub," and it detailed how the sexual abuse and rape of children was being displayed on websites like Pornhub, and that little or nothing was being done to either A, prevent it, or B, remove it once it was found out. So there was a recent high-profile case, website I'm not going to mention, but they put a well-known pornographer in jail because he was luring women into this industry with false modeling jobs. He was then drugging, filming, and raping them, and he was profiting from it. Now, by definition of the law, this is sex trafficking, and he's now serving a 20-year sentence. But if you think about, for these women, there's no amount of financial compensation that can undo the trauma that their victimization has caused. And again, if I quote Samuel Perry, again, he's not a Christian, but in his book, Addicted to Lust, he said, "The finding that men, and sometimes but not always women, who use pornography tend to report lower relationship quality is one of the most consistent findings in all of pornographic research." End quote. So that shouldn't really be surprising. If we train our brains to objectify and commodify other people, how can we then engage in a loving relationship with others where we seek to love them for more than just their body? And this is one of the reasons that porn use is associated with erectile dysfunction, especially in young men. They're basically burning their mind out on pornographic content to the point where a real woman isn't able to stimulate them sexually. Porn also makes significant impacts on the brain. So modern neuroscience imagery will show how the brain of a porn addict is similar to the brain of a heroin addict. As porn functions like a drug, it becomes the default method for medicating any and all negative emotions. And so all that is really the non-religious argument. But I think from a Christian perspective, we're created in the image of God. Therefore, all people have dignity, value, and worth from their Creator. And so I am called to love others more than myself, not use other people for my personal pleasure. So summarizing that, that was a lot there, but porn victimizes others, causes reduced relational and marital quality, and then it dishonors God and his design for sexuality.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful.
There's a lot there. There's probably books written on all that content, but I think the association with human trafficking is something very few people know, and that's a very important piece when we answer that question: what's the harm behind pornography?
Yeah, I think it goes way many layers more deep than people really might think. Yeah. And as the message gets out, and as you are able to talk to younger people, that's bringing something to light that maybe someone, even one of my viewers, has just really not considered before.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, you did a really interesting, you're in the middle of, or finishing, depending on when this airs, a series on your channel that talks about even an article that was linking pornography use and depression, which was really interesting to me. Would you be willing to share a little bit more about what was found out about that correlation?
Yeah, so specifically, that was in Samuel Perry's book, Addicted to Lust, and what he was saying about the link between pornography and depression among Christians is that moral incongruence of we are doing something that violates our conscience. So one of the things he mentions in his book is that he didn't find any Christians who were willing to say viewing pornography was good and acceptable for Christians to do. So there aren't a lot of Christians saying porn is okay, but there are a lot of us Christians that are really struggling with it. And so that leads to that cognitive dissonance, and it's depressing. And I mentioned in the harms that it destroys relational quality. So as somebody who struggled with a porn addiction myself, it hindered my ability to relate well to other people. It hindered my ability to treat women with dignity and value instead of simply objectifying them. And so I think those that are struggling with it, it's hurting their relational qualities. They're not finding true relational fulfillment, even just in friendships. And so it can lead to that depression. Some of that guilt and shame that is associated with looking at that content actually causes us to withdraw from relationships. So we're kind of sitting in the barber chair, you're not going out and hanging out with people. One of the interesting things that Samuel Perry pointed out was Christians who are struggling with pornography are less likely to engage in Christian activity. So they're drawing back from church, they're drawing back from leadership opportunities. They're not doing the things that will really fulfill them. Yeah. So that's part of that connection with depression.
It really is just that.
Yeah.
You know, and even though that was cited as being more of a Christian thing, I could see that in no matter if any religious, pick one.
Right.
Really.
Yeah. You wouldn't necessarily have, like, if you don't view pornography as immoral, you wouldn't necessarily cause that cognitive dissonance, but it is going to cause the relational quality to suffer. And so in that regard, I think it really can cause that depression and some of the mental health challenges.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the slippery slope for a minute and relate that back to perhaps even internet access for teens, for kids that are now getting their cell phone use, that have their own tablets, that have been virtually learning last year. I mean, all of the things. Where do you see, because you see this, you're seeing this now, in 18, 19, 20-year-olds, but it didn't start there.
Right.
So what are you seeing as either triggers, or what are some things, if people are parents that are watching this, that they should be looking out for? And then, we'll get to some solutions and some really positive things here in just a couple minutes. But what is that slippery slope? What should we be looking out for? How does this start? Is there a little fox, that we need to look out for, that kind of thing?
So, lots of concerns for parents. It's not something that parents should stick their head in the sand and say, my child would never. For a lot of parents, they look at their kid and say, my kid would never do that. And I think there's some truth to that, and that their kid probably doesn't wake up one day and say, I'd like to be a porn addict. And I challenge them to view it as the porn industry is preying upon your children. So I tell parents that by default, your kids will be exposed to porn and will trend towards significant struggle or addiction with pornography. And so it is something they want to be educated about. They're going to need to make technological decisions, build boundaries, and provide some wisdom in this area. Don't throw your kids on the internet and think everything is going to be fine. So I recommend parents look at software, something like Covenant Eyes, which is what I use. That provides accountability and monitoring for internet devices. And there are certainly other monitoring solutions as well. Most parents probably wouldn't drop their kid off in the middle of the Las Vegas Strip late at night and say, hey, be safe, have fun. But we give them unmonitored access to the internet. And in a lot of ways, that's similar in that all the temptations of the world are available online. But worse than that, people we would never want them talking with have access to our kids on the internet. And that's particularly an issue for our young girls, as predators are actively using digital means, social media primarily. Instagram is a huge problem of trying to access our children. And they're able to do that. There's a rise of something called sextortion, which is where somebody extorts pictures from a child And then they use those pictures as leverage to get more graphic pictures, or in a worst case scenario, actually open the door for trafficking to say, if you don't do these things, I'm going to show your parents, I'm going to show your friends at school these pictures that you've taken. And giving a kid the internet is allowing all those people access to try to do that to them. So and social media in particular is really destructive. We talked about mental health. It can be really destructive for our young women as well. There really isn't a positive mental health correlation for giving our children social media. And they're going to need some boundaries, and we're going to need to help them with issues like screen time.
Yeah, the sticking your head in the sand or saying that that's not my kid, that's just not going to do it nowadays, is it?
Right, yeah. And I mean, I definitely was the kid that wouldn't do that. So that's part of my testimony. I think, my parents are both church-going people. They were a little bit shocked. I was supposedly the good kid. But, when it's available at home and you fall into it, and if you have a good kid reputation, it's hard to admit, hey, I'm seeing these things I wish I wasn't. It's a shameful thing to bring into the light. Yeah. So definitely don't want to fall into that trap thinking your kid wouldn't do that.
The NoFAP movement has been kind of taking certain channels, even your major, million-plus gold, silver button play things, whatever those things are called. That's been a thing. So
yeah.
What is your take on the NoFAP movement? Do you think that it's helpful? Do you think people are getting it right, getting it wrong? Is it something that you encourage, you talk about? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think the nice thing of a movement like that, and if people have never heard of that, it's simply a group of people that are trying to remove masturbation, which is usually accompanied with pornography, out of their life. And one of the things that shows us is that it's not exclusively a religious movement. So the founder of that organization is actually an atheist, but yet he noticed how porn was reducing his quality of relationships. And in general, he hated what it was doing to him. And so he sparked a movement of people that wanted to eliminate it out of their life, not for religious reasons, but primarily from what they were seeing it do to them. And then there's another organization also that's non-religious that's speaking out against porn, and that is a group called Fight the New Drug. So that's ftnd.org. And they are using nothing but science to provide arguments against the harms of pornography. And they do presentations. They actually came here to Clemson just a couple years ago to do a presentation to students here. And they go around and explain to college students what are the harms of pornography. And they're not coming from a religious side.
Wow. That's actually, I've heard of one of those and hadn't heard of the other. So I'll make sure, I'm sure those are all on your channel as well, but
Yep.
Correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I reference Fight the New Drug quite a lot because they're giving scientific, non-religious arguments, and they have tons of sources and studies that they're using. So they do an excellent job.
Okay, and I will say Enneagram 5, your YouTube channel is incredibly helpful with all the different resources. You cite your different sources and all of that. So again, Soulfire 209, and I'll link below.
Yeah, it's certainly divisive because there are plenty of people that would say there's no harm in pornography, and so it's good to have some of those studies to back that up. At the same time, the pornography industry is a billion-dollar industry, so they have plenty of studies that they have paid for that will give you some opposite information. So, and that's a challenge with anything. If you want to talk about nutrition, you want to talk about something like that, you're going to find studies on both sides. But yeah, got to ask who paid for it.
Well, and we had a message series not too long ago about the person that speaks the loudest.
Yep.
Yep. And you gotta. If you want to believe if you want to believe something, you can find anyone.
Yeah, definitely.
To tell you that you're right. Right. How has the landscape changed? You've been in this, you've been in this ministry a while. What have you seen that's changing that encourages you? Anything that you're seeing that is very concerning? What do you see?
Yeah, so the pandemic was really perfect for the porn industry because they used the lockdowns to offer premium subscriptions to many of the larger sites. And then they used emotions like fear and loneliness, isolation that they knew would draw many people to medicate with porn. So in a lot of ways, it was bad news. But one of the things you did see was, like I mentioned, that New York Times article. This is the first time that I've been addressing issues of pornography for probably 12 to 13 years. This is the first time I've seen major players in the porn industry get shut down. So I mentioned Pornhub in that article in the New York Times. They had to scrub 40% of their website because they couldn't prove it wasn't trafficking related, or they knew it was trafficking related. And so governments around the world for the first time are actually pushing back against the exploitation of children and trafficking. And then the parent company of Pornhub, they actually just announced a shutdown of one of their biggest websites due to the same issue of trafficking. And that is unheard of. Just imagine a major player in the porn industry completely removing a website that is highly profitable because they know it has trafficking and it has children on it. I mean, that's terrifying to realize. But thank goodness the government is finally pushing back. But in a lot of ways, you know, the lockdowns were the opposite of what we needed for mental health, right? So we isolated ourselves. We lived indoor, sedentary lifestyles. We canceled community. We canceled religious events. We were taught to fear socialization and community. And so that's not a good idea. And I think it caused many people to seek the false intimacy that porn provides. But I'm thankful that there is some pushback, that we're seeing some of these major players take some significant hits.
So kind of the good and the bad.
Yep. Yep.
But it is encouraging. I mean, that maybe through all of this, when mental health and all of the things now are actually being taken a look at, people are like, whoa.
Right. Yep.
Like, this is more of a, we didn't know, you know.
Yeah.
Or not that we didn't know, we just didn't address, or whatever.
Right.
However you want to look at that, I suppose. If someone recognizes today that they have are struggling with this, or perhaps even have an addiction to this, what would be some what would you tell them? Like right now, if somebody's watching saying, you know, I have an issue here, what would be if they walked into your office, what would be the first thing that you would do? What would you tell someone? Yeah,
so one thing I would just say is it's time to get help. You know, hiding does not lead to healing. And so the good news is there are lots of resources for both men and women, Christian and non-Christian. And, you know, most of the resources I recommend are from a Christian perspective. But what I would want to see first and foremost in that person's life is for them to find a small group that they can join. Something like, I mean, Celebrate Recovery is an example of a group that's nationwide, or there are other groups that you can commit to. I mean, I think a nice thing of looking for a church is that a lot of churches have groups that are fellowship and accountability groups to help people with a variety of issues. But there are non-Christian resources out there available. But that would be my number one thing, would be find a group that you can plug into, because you've got to get into community, because the isolation is what's keeping you stuck down in pornography. I do wish I had one silver bullet. There really isn't a silver bullet. You know, when you talk addiction, we want to see a lot of changes take place to get somebody out of that. But I would start with finding a group.
I think people think of recovery or groups, and they think of like AA or NA. Mm-hmm. But there's some that are very specific to each addiction, and then there are some that are like just addiction in general.
And some of them are just saying, we need community, right? So whatever you're recovering from, you know, it may not be an addiction per se, but you're envisioning a different life. You're envisioning living life with other people, with authentic relationships. So I'm all about the small groups. I think they're critical.
Yeah, agreed. Jason, would you be able to share with us all of your handles on social and your channel if someone wanted to reach out to you or see more of your content?
Yeah, so probably the best spot is my website, which is warofthesoul.com, or you can hop on my YouTube channel, Soulfire209, and then both of those have links to social media and the other things that I get involved in. But yeah, probably warofthesoul.com is your best bet.
This is one on the books. Number one, high five to you.
All right. Best and worst interview you've ever had. Yeah.
Yes, and we've got it on video to prove it. So there we go. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for your time. Come back and we can discuss identity and integrity.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Jason's information is below, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.